Okay. I want to welcome everyone to this month's meeting of the Houston Functional Programming User Group. And today I am excited that we have Shae Erisson speaking to us about uh, community development and Haskell. So, Shae, if you want to introduce yourself and take it away.
Hello, my name is Shae Erisson. I did a whole lot of things in the Haskell community. Uh, I think there's reasonable evidence to say that perhaps I started a big chunk of it, and I have opinions. Yeah, boy, do I have opinions. Anyway, let's start the slides and let's see what you think. Yeah, so I will share my screen, and if you don't see slides, if you don't see an Emacs buffer with some text in it, then I'm doing it wrong. Okay, somebody's all right, cool. Um, One of the things that there's really two goals. There's two things I really want to say in this talk. I want to say that you, whoever is listening, you have permission to do all sorts of things that you might not otherwise think. That can be, and that can be you can do a lot of stuff. There's a lot of these rules that people say you can't do these things, or that's not true. It's all just kind of imaginary. You can just make it up. All the rules we have are made up, right? Somebody made them up. You can make up new ones. You can change anything. Um, but also, if you see a thing that looks like it needs to be done and no one is doing it, there might be a good reason. That is, there may be an incentive for it not to be done. I think I have, you know what, I'm going to see. Did I actually link my yeah, so I think I put up a gist of my slides, and I'm going to share it so that you can go ahead and get the links you want if you want. And that way, hopefully, it makes everybody's life easier. Uh, and that's actually my slides. So, um, one of the great things about doing a lot of the work around the edges that honestly organizations need or communities need or whatever is that it really benefits like everybody involved. Uh, and one of the downsides of this sort of thing is that it doesn't really pay off. You know, like what is the actual? You often do not get a monetary benefit, and that's pretty much what I'm gonna. That's pretty much what I'm gonna talk about. So I'm gonna actually talk about a whole bunch of things that I did that will hopefully demonstrate to you that you have the power, you have the ability to just kind of do anything. Um, and Sometimes you'll make a thing, you'll make an organization, and nobody will show up, and that's okay. Maybe it wasn't actually needed. Just try something else. In the '90s, when I was in college, I kind of accidentally started a board games group because I was just showing up at this like I think it was like Thursday at like 6. I would show up at board games, and it was just one or two people, and then it was like 20 people, and then they got the tiny restaurant got a little grumpy. Um, and then like I guess a year and a half later, when I moved away, kind of everyone believed the board games group had been around forever, but in fact. It was just that once everyone believed that there was a board games group, then there was a board games group. It's like I always thought about like tying a knot in nothing, tying a knot of belief, sort of. Once enough people believe that something is real and it exists, then it is, and that's all that matters. But it was kind of awesome that this was kind of now a standing wave in reality or whatever. Like there was something that people believed in, and there was kind of a rush, and I wanted to do more of that. So um, I guess about the same time, you may remember Java if you're old enough. You may remember Duke. They had this cute little mascot. Like you could get stuffed programming language mascots. And this was like the first time, there was an advertising budget for programming languages and developer mindshare, right? It was kind of like this network effect. Like suddenly it was, what's the hot new thing? Have you looked at this cool feature? Have you done this thing? Like what's awesome about this new thing? And that was kind of interesting. Suddenly there were like communities around programming languages. Uh, so about 1999, I let's see, I just picked up Python a few years before. I started writing Emacs Lisp, and I kind of discovered that like in Python you'd have all these different returns could be anywhere, like control flows all over the place. And this I figured out this thing from eLisp, like the last result or the last computation in like little bit of Emacs Lisp would just be the return value. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. There's not a return. There's only one return. It's like the result of the and then like whatever you pass in, and I was like, wow, this is a beautiful pattern. I love it. All my code gets so much simpler. And my friend Darius Bacon was like, why are you writing Haskell in Python? And I was like, what's Haskell? And then I went to look at the Haskell programming language website. I was like, wow, it's beautiful. This diamond shape, this incredibly like elegant expression of programming. And I tried the gentle introduction to Haskell, and I completely failed to learn Haskell. It just didn't work at all. And I was like, all right, well, if I can't teach myself Haskell, maybe I can get other people to teach me Haskell. And so I created an IRC channel, and then I told a bunch of academics on the Haskell mailing list that there were smart, intelligent, informed academics on the Haskell IRC channel. And once they showed up, it was true, right? And so, how else do you bootstrap it, right? Suddenly, there were like people on this IRC channel who were talking about awesome Haskell stuff. And well, so early on, someone showed up and they were like, "Well, I've almost finished my PhD from the University of Oxford in functional programming, and you do not have almost a PhD in Haskell, and so I am better qualified to run this IRT channel." And I was like, "Yeah, maybe so, but I'm going to give it a go, and if it fails, I'll hand it up to you." And they're like, "Well, I guess." And another thing, speaking of kind of like elitism that covers up in the Haskell community, is that people would show up in the Haskell IRC channel like, "Oh, I will never have a PhD in math, and thus I can never learn the Haskell programming language." And I would say, guess what? I have never had a class, any sort of university class in math or computer science. Not only can I write Haskell, I have been paid to write Haskell. And sometimes that would kind of shame them into writing Haskell, and it worked. Um, there's still a huge chunk of like people who've never written Haskell who have this like belief that it is requires a PhD in math, but like whatever, fine. Um, so I put a lot of energy into the IRC channel. I would tell people, like as soon as they showed up, I would say, here's the resources for learning. Here's the people who will answer questions, like and I assumed that people who showed up in the Haskell IRC channel, if they acted poorly, like insulting people or being mean or whatever, I assumed that they had come from someplace like the Perl IRC channel, where that was expected behavior. And so the first thing I would do is I would try to inform them of the community standards. I would say, this is acceptable behavior, and here's why. I try to give them like, rational explanations. And I had the 3 steps, which was like, look, if you're acting badly, let me tell you what the difference is. And then if they continue to act badly, I was like, poink, you're out of the IRC channel, and feel free to rejoin if you feel like you can, reform yourself, change your ways. And if it just didn't work, then that's it. You were banned until I remember how to unban someone, which generally didn't happen. The rules. Oh, good question. So when someone has joined an IRC channel, you can forcibly remove them, like kick them, and part they will leave the channel, but they can then immediately rejoin. Whereas if instead they've been banned, they cannot rejoin until the ban has been lifted. So it's more like the second offense, kicking someone, was like, let me not only tell you how you're supposed to act, but what the consequences will be if you don't do it. So that was the difference between kicking and banning someone. And I tried to kind of put together some rules. I think this is before like a code of conduct was like a real thing. But every time I tried to come up with like rules, it ended up either being way too much or it just wasn't going to cover all the situations. And so it really came down to, I decided like be nice or else, which some parts of the internet have called like don't be a dick, right? And I think it's uh, I think that in cases where someone acts poorly, the best thing to do is to explain to them why that was not a good way to behave. Honestly, kind of like the Recurse Center rules. Like if you violate one of the social rules of the Recurse Center, it's okay because maybe you didn't know, maybe you didn't realize. And when someone tells you, you apologize, you move on, you try not to do that. I mean, I think that's a good way to do it. So this was wildly successful, and I mean wildly successful. There is a really famous like paste where someone showed up trying to be a real raging asshole, and 15 minutes later they were learning Haskell. So um, that's cool, right? Like, and I think that one of the benefits of my heavy duty enforcement of like removing removing the kind of the mean people from the community was that Haskell got the community get this like a reputation for being friendly, accepting, as long as you're like nice to people. And honestly, it inspired a whole bunch of other communities later, like the Rust communities, or one of the early Rust communities linked to this. This particular IRC, and like a lot of that's like how to be nice people, don't tolerate the poisonous people. One of the things I talk about is that if you go into something like at the time, if you would go into the Perl community, the longtime members would have an ignore list, and that is that they would not see traffic from the people who are off their meds or whatever they were doing. And but then when the new people would join, they were not aware there was an ignore list. They were not aware that the content from the poorly behaved people was being filtered out. They didn't know. They assumed that was how everyone acted, and generally they get added to the ignore list if they hung around. So that's not okay. Anyway, so all right, so Haskell grew to 10,000, 11,000 members, which is like huge. It was I think the only two IRC channels that were larger were like Ubuntu and Linux, and that was it on Freenode, and that was it. Uh, and then the downside, of course, was that when you've got, I don't know, 25 conversations happening at the same time, because you've got 10,000 people joined, maybe only 100 people are active, but like it's just really hard to keep up. And I mean, we ended up splitting off into a bunch of others. There was Haskell Off Topic, there was Haskell In Depth, there was Haskell Beginners, there was like all these other ones, and that was okay. I guess it worked, but still sometimes it got very unreadable. One of the tricks that worked out surprisingly well was we had this IRC bot called Lambda Bot that was written in Haskell, and this person Andrew Bromage, who went by pseudonym on IRC, he wrote this bot and he had a Hello plugin, but he didn't have a plugin system. So I just was like, I guess I will. And I was like, you know what? No one's using the @ sign for anything, so I'm just gonna say that's how commands start. So commands start with an @ sign, and there's the name of the command, and the text just gets pitched into whatever the code is, and whatever it does, it then replies, and that's what you put on the channel. And so the kind of the social reinforcement there was if you were to plug in, you could then have ops on the bot, and then that way, like that bot could join your channel, and you could show it off to people that you've done all this cool stuff. And then actually what was his name? I forgot. Somebody then was like, you know what? I like this IRC bot thing. I'm going to rewrite it in the Python. And he made this thing called SoupyBot. SoupyBot was pretty popular. SoupyBot used the @ sign. All the other IRC bots ended up using the @ sign after SoupyBot. So there is reasonable evidence that I am to blame for the @ sign before Twitter names and whatever else. Bizarre, isn't it? I guess I feel like if you just do a bunch of things in life and you try to do cool stuff, at some point you will have an influence. I don't know. Also,
so I'm going to interrupt here and say one of my great joys in life as a father is messing with my children. And so I routinely tell them that, like, oh, one of my good friends invented this thing. Or like I just make up stuff all about like, oh, my friend did this or my friend did that. And at this point, they don't believe me at all. And now I'm gonna be like, no, my friend actually did invent adding people, and they're never gonna believe me. It's gonna be lovely. It's gonna be so wonderful. I'm so excited about this.
what
Thank you.
time frame? Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think it was 2001 or 2002. So this is before Twitter, and before pretty much before all those things, right? Um, yeah. So there's at least reasonable evidence. Of course, if there's conflicting evidence, I will happily update. But at least it seems reasonable. All right, so Roundabot's still running because it was like so wildly popular, so much functionality got stuffed into it. I don't know how many. I hosted it for like 7 years, and a whole bunch of people wrote plugins. There was like every kind of plugin you could think of, and some of it actually was useful enough to get integrated back into things like GCI and stuff, which was kind of amazing. And at least one participant, Don Stewart, who you may have heard of, uh, pretty much got way more excited about working on LambdaBot instead of working on his thesis topic. And there was this frustration whenever we would like, people were like, oh, we've got a new plugin. I want to install this thing. I want to brag. And sometimes it took 15 minutes, right? If it was like a lot to compile or something. And I think I was running it on like a 400 megahertz computer. It was not a lot of hardware. And so Don Stewart was like, "This is just angering me. This is just bothering me." So he ended up using this thing. There's this thing called GHCI in the Haskell community, which is where you can write a little snippet of code and it gets compiled into effectively a shared object and then loaded into the running process. And he was like, this is okay, but I can make it better. And in fact, he did. He made it so good that same improved technology was later used by Facebook to do runtime reloading of spam detection for their messenger and for everything else. Uh, Facebook's spam detection used Haskell for, I don't know, 10 years or something. I think they just switched away again from Haskell. Um, so all sorts of, interesting things. All right, so then I was living in Sweden, and there in Uppsala, Sweden, there was EuroPython. And I was like, you know what? There's like a 5-day conference for Python, but you know what? I went to Haskell conference. So me and Anders Carlson, who later wrote most of Dbus, we're gonna go to his apartment, and I was gonna sit on the one chair he had. He was gonna sit on his bed. It was not a big apartment. We were gonna drink a beer and talk about Haskell. That was the plan, right? And then another person, Bjorn Bringer, was like, "Oh, I want to show up too." And I'm like, "Okay, we can fit 3 people." And then 2 or 3 other people wanted to show up. And so uh, at that point, we're gonna have it at a bar. And then someone got on the Haskell IRC channel and was like, "Hey, I heard there's this, conference happening. What if I get lost? How do I contact people?" And I'm like, "Oh, here's my email address." And they submitted a paper. So someone submitted a research paper to my joke conference, and I had 2 choices then. I could either tell them it was a joke, or I could find a venue, right? So that was how I accidentally organized my first conference. I asked John Hughes, author of Quick Check, QVixed, and a bunch of other wonderful stuff, if I could, like, hey, can you get us a room? And he was like, yeah, sure. And he gave a talk on arrows, which were a new thing at the time. Um, it was fun, novel research. Some of the research that was presented there for the first time later became popular in Galois and got used by the Department of Defense. Long, complicated stories, whatever. So a couple of years later, um, the Microsoft research in Cambridge, the original Cambridge in UK, where the Simons worked on the Glasgow Haskell compiler. They were hiring a gopher, an assistant for GHC, and someone was like, "Shae, you should apply." And I was like, "All right, fine." So I applied. And I was one of the 3 people who was going to have an interview. We had like this 3-month window for interviews, and it took me 15 minutes to figure out who the other 2 people were because I just knew everybody. And it took me 15 more minutes to say, "Hey, let's all interview on the same day." And they were like, "Why would we do that?" I was like, "So we can have a conference." And people came from Italy, and people came from Ireland, and people came from like several different places in the continental Europe to come to Cambridge for this conference on the weekend. It was a lot of fun. I went punting. Have you ever been punting in Cambridge? Anyway, completely off topic. One of the things that was odd was that I'm not exactly sure why, but Microsoft Research was super stressed out by the fact that we were all going to talk to each other before and after those interviews. I don't really know why they were so upset about that, but they were. Um, and of course, when I talk about conference organizing, it's like disorganizing because I just stood in front of people and said, "Hey, who's ready to give a talk?" That was it. The person who said they were going to give their first talk was like, "Oh, I'm not ready." I was like, "Fine, who else is ready? I don't care. We're just here to." Anglo Haskell continued for 4 years. I did not get that job. Also, if at any point you have questions for clarification and other stuff, like just unmute and ask questions because there was like a lot of stuff. Uh, so I had a friend, the person who started the Java IRC channel. His name is Cheezer. Every couple of years I'll just drop into the Java channel and say hi to him. We have silly jokes. And I was telling him I think about monoids when I first realized that you can use a monoid to actually spread a computation across a bunch of CPUs. And at this time, it wasn't that common to have more than I think I ended up spending an unreasonable amount of money to get like a 2-core, like a 2 NUMA system, right? I had 2 different CPUs and they each had their own memory. This is like Athlon XP. This is long ago and far away. And so I actually had the ability to like split things across 2 cores. Nobody else did really. But my friend couldn't get into the monoid stuff. He was like, "Man, these research papers suck. It's too hard. I just can't deal with it." And I was like, it'd be nice. It'd be nice if there was something that was like more hardcore than a blog post, but not quite as hardcore as a research paper. And this worked. This worked really, really well. I just basically, since I knew everybody and I knew the stuff they're working on, I just basically wandered around the people and I was like, I'm sure that Claude wants to talk about how OCaml can be used. to compute the dissemination of scientific research by building a graph of citations and their time. Honestly, wouldn't that be a great talk? Anyway.
I'm on it.
So, and that worked, like it was just amazing to me that I decided to make this kind of semi-academic, anti-academic journal. The idea was just to kind of get this stuff out there and not quite as terrifying as a research paper. Actually, it was even worse. The Monad Reader was designed to be like a terrible, terrible pun, a terrible joke, because there is this thing called the reader monad in Haskell. There's a writer monad. There's things like that. But in like the real world outside of academia, there's things called like the Utney reader or the something reader, right? And so this terrible pun was like, and it was sort of like, it wasn't exactly how can I piss off the academics, but it wasn't too far off. And I was also like, you know what, we're going to put this all in a wiki. You all have to write stuff in the wiki, in wiki markdown format. And like the academics were like, can we please use LaTeX and like publish a PDF? And I was like, no, not okay. We're going to do this, and so, but a lot of people publish stuff. I think I ran this. I think I ran it for 2.5 years, something like that. And then I handed it off to Walter Sierra, and he was like, "Can I please switch to LaTeX?" And I was like, "All right, look, it's yours. You do whatever you want." He was like, "Can I change the name?" I was like, "Nope, can't change the name." So, and honestly, like, there's a lot of stuff. At least one of the articles in the Motivator has like 40 citations. Like, there's a lot of things in the Motivator that have citations. So I think it worked. It's kind of a bizarre way to kind of like back your way into academic publishing, but whatever, it was fine. I think my goal though was to try to have a way to make a living as like a programmer and also a people organizer, some way that actually put these two pieces together. And this did not work. This absolutely did not work. I mean, I feel like I really did change the world for the better in a small way, because I think I increased the dissemination, the spreading of like the cool, awesome things that are in Haskell to the rest of the world. Python's list comprehensions came from Haskell. There's like 1,000 different features in other programming languages that did come from Haskell. I got name brand recognition. My name is in the History of Haskell paper twice. I tend to move every year or year and a half, and so I started a bunch of Haskell users groups. Some of them stayed, like the one here in Boston, where I'm back now for the third time. That one actually ran for 10 years, 15 years. The one in Atlanta became a Lisp group. There's like a bunch of groups I started different places. But I really was like, all right, it feels like a badge of success, or would be a badge of success, to get paid to write Haskell. Like that was a thing I wanted to do. Especially because I didn't have a degree at this time. I didn't, and I did write a bunch of like little pieces, little snippets. Clients were like, "Do this thing. We just want this thing done. We don't care how you do it." Great, I can use Haskell to do that, and it worked great. In some cases, I could do in a weekend what the in-house professional, the employer's programmer couldn't do in months. I could sometimes do in a weekend. That happened a couple of times, and Credit Suisse was like, "Shae, we've been reading about the stuff you've been saying for domain-specific languages. The gnomes of Zurich, right? Anyway, so they were like, we want to hire you to work on our global economic modeling cluster." They had this massive number of computers that simulated the entire world's economy. And so they were like, "Where'd you get your PhD?" And I was like, "Well, I don't have a PhD." And they're like, "Oh, that's fine. We stretched that down to a master's degree once, no problem." And I was like, "Well, I don't have a master's degree." And they were like, "You don't? Well, where'd you get your degree?" And I was like, "I have never had a college course in math or computer science." And they were kind of, there was kind of a disconnect there. Credit Suisse did not hire me. I applied to Galois, which is kind of the Department of Defense, like half Haskell and formal methods and that sort of stuff. Either 5 or 6 times I've applied there, and I've never been hired by them because I wasn't technical enough, roughly. So that's an interesting. All right, so went to Recurse Center in 2019, did 2 batches in a row, 6 months, pretty much writing Haskell. Actually, it's not true. The first 3 months I was just kind of like, not exactly a party person, but I was like a raging extrovert. And I just was like, attend all the events, like organize all the other events that don't exist yet. And but then at the end of my first 3 months, my first batch, I was like, wait a second, my goal is to write a bunch of Haskell. So the next 3 months, I actually went to the quiet floor, the quiet room, and just wrote Haskell for 16 hours a day. And that actually worked really well. And I wrote this really cool application called Fermat's Last Margin that lets you annotate research papers and share your annotations with people. And it was great, actually. And I never quite finished it because I got a Haskell job. And then I got 2 or 3 Haskell jobs. I don't remember. I had a few up until recently. Um, so if we talk about the culture now, the IRC channel is still active because there was like so much momentum, but it's really shrunk a lot. And most people who are getting new into programming of whatever sort, they haven't heard of IRC. That's not a thing. It's kind of an ancient technology at this point. There's a Discord. There's several Discords. There's a Slack that I do not recommend. There's a Zulip that is worse. The Matrix Room is okay. The Haskell Foundation is kind of a bunch of academics who are doing community building, and this sort of works for them. Uh, I'm absolutely not bitter that the last executive that I became in second for the most recent Haskell Foundation executive director. No, absolutely not bitter. Actually, I'm not, because of the fact that I think that uh, Haskell's kind of shrunk a lot. You know, what was it? 2 years ago, there was kind of this big downturn in the job market, and a lot of the Haskell companies just kind of fell over. Most of the work I've seen lately is either in cryptocurrency or it's at Mercury, which has like, what do they have now? 150 Haskellers, something like that. A huge number of Haskellers at like Mercury. Um, or you can get a bunch of the Bitnomial or a bunch of the cryptocurrency jobs. Um, yeah, so don't try to make a daily living, a daily wage off of open source software, and also don't try to make money building communities. Um, I must be nervous. I talked about twice as fast as I expected. Oh yeah, so I did finish my bachelor's degree in 2013. It only took me 24 years from my first college course to actually graduating. And this now means the funny thing about this is I can now get a job almost anywhere because it's illegal to ask people how old they are in job interviews. And so the proxy for that is, when did you get your degree? And because, so this basically, I look like someone who's not that old who has an incredible amount of programming experience. Yeah. So I've got like, okay, so now I have some questions for the audience. Why is it so hard to make money doing community organizing? And I have some theories. Should I have given up earlier? Probably yes. Does Claude get enough credit for doing unpaid work organizing the Houston Functional Programmers Users Group? Probably not, but needs more credit. Yeah, I mean, I've got like some other stuff that just kind of, I have a bunch of patterns that I know work. Um, I don't know, like that's it, I guess. I have a bunch of other stuff. All right. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any?
I really like it. So and I'm I'm not super young, but I sort of have discovered recently that showing up to things, and I mean, like, I'm not, I've been showing up to this group, and there's another group that I show up to, and like, not even just like being there every week, like, is n+1. And that could be the difference between a group dying. I mean, and I'm not taking any credit because Cloud does all the work. Like, he does a great job, and other people too. But yeah, no, I mean, like, I think if you're not the one organizing, I'm not like, you know, I haven't, but like, at least, I don't know. I feel like being a regular is a big help. Not to like take credit for that, but it's true. So
I absolutely agree. Like one of my important patterns is, whatever your thing is that's going on, if nobody else shows up except the organizer for 2 times in a row, it's time to end it.
yeah,
Because then honestly, no one's interested. Yeah, I totally agree.
Oh, I totally agree with that. And what I've seen, because I've organized stuff for years now as well, not quite as long as Shae, but not much less. Um, is yes, having sort of a core group of people who show up is really what makes the group work. And there's been a real attenuation of that over the past, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. And I'm very curious as to why that is the case. And I have hypotheses, but I really don't know because it's hard to talk to the people who stop attending. Figure out what's going on there.
What are your theories? Now I'm really curious.
I think I think the major thing right now is that the economy is tightened and people are just busy and tired. So I think that's one. Um, I think that it used to be the case. I think the internet is a huge one where it used to be the case to get your answers, you had to go in person and talk to people, right? So if we think about the, like Linux bring your own box parties and stuff, because you literally couldn't install Linux without getting help. And so people would have to like bring their computers together to do that. And now you can do it online. And so that kind of thing has sort of gone, it's not, that's not needed in the same way. Um, Again, going back to the economy, I've talked with people at FPUG who say, yeah, I'm kind of strategic and I show up when I think I'm going to learn something, right? And that struck me because I was always one of the people who was like, I'm going to show up every week or every month or whatever it is. So other thoughts I'd love to hear.
I kind of get that mindset. That sort of like self-interested mindset where it's like, well, this is something that's like directly applicable to me. But like I feel like it's also my experience as a software engineer, like the difference between like consulting and working a full-time gig is that even like dumb things in the full-time gig, like you can find interesting angles to it, you know? And I think it's the same thing with this sort of stuff. It's like I might not know about anything about, I don't use Haskell, I don't know anything about like IRC. I do. But um, but I feel like there's an interesting angle here, and like I'm really excited to hear this. This conversation is something that's been brewing in the back of my head, and it's helpful for me to hear other people talk about it. So I didn't expect to hear, in this kind of talk.
So I'm looking at the chat, and I'd encourage people to just unmute themselves and share.
It's recording, and then we'll get the
To get to
keeper on.
the okay, so that's fair. Yes, I had said that. Yes, we will turn off the recording at some point and get really into it. I'm happy to do that. But I will ask if there are any questions that you want to sort of. Oh, there's a dog on the recording. That was very important.
She had to hop in last minute.
She is very adorable, I have to say. Um, what is she? What type of dog is she?
She's a rescue, but we're pretty sure she's a beagle. So
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
like,
Yeah, I have a friend who has beagles and she looks very much like a beagle. Okay. In your question, Shae, were there any in particular that you wanted to sort of ask before we turn off the recording?
I guess like I have some vague answers for like. I think one of the reasons it's hard to get paid to do community organizing is perhaps because it's so hard to measure the benefit. Like when it comes to someone who makes hardware, like I know Christopher has some connection to actual hardware getting shipped. That's really easy to measure. If it works, it works, and if it doesn't, that's fine. Shipping software, it's not as easy to measure, but it's at least sort of easy to measure, I guess. Whereas, um, how do you like measure the social or community health of a job or a place of work? I mean, it's like in some ways it's obvious when it's gone bad, right? You know that like when this half the company hates that half the company and won't approve anyone's PRs or whatever, you can see the signs of like a really bad culture. But I mean, honestly, I've had a lot of employers who are like, "Oh yes, we value community culture. Our workplace is I think that's a bunch of hooey, as they would have said, in Alabama. It's just I think most companies don't have any idea how culture works, which to me means that maybe it hasn't become like a differentiator. Maybe it doesn't actually affect the bottom line. But that's not always true. Um, I don't know. I guess like that's something I would still kind of like to. I would like to be able to point to a company that has a really good work culture and show how it is like a huge benefit, but I don't have such a thing.
But your point, if something is hard to measure, then it's going to be hard to um, understand if it does affect the bottom line. Maybe it does, but if you can't measure it, then how do you know? So I think that that's a really important observation.
I have one question I'd like to ask. Did you feel any kind of culture change in the Haskell community as it went from being almost unused to being, I don't know, realistic but not very popular, to then being like, I don't know what it is nowadays. I mean, I would consider it still like production ready, but then there's this decline that you're talking about, which might not actually have anything to do with Haskell. So maybe that's an industry wide thing. But then, I think Haskell is. Have seen a lot of people going to Rust, right? So that's a weird situation when you're working with this language that's much older, should be more mature, but then this other language just completely overtakes it, right? Then you don't have the feeling you're on the precipice of progress anymore. But it's then that's not a technical concern, but it's something that could leak into these kinds of conferences that you're hosting, right? Because then suddenly you don't get the same kind of people joining anymore.
Let me see if I can boil that question down to something I can answer. Yes, the community did change. I think it started out being very academic. It started out being uh, like researchers. They are incentivized to publish or perish, and so that was very much how Haskell started. And in fact, in a lot of ways, you can still see that in the compiler when they added things like linear types and other stuff. I don't know. Maybe they are really great in production code, but I've never used them. And so, in many cases, the Glasgow Haskell compiler was a vehicle for publishing research papers so that academics could continue to be employed. And that was, I mean, that's reasonable. I don't know. Maybe was it accidentally became a production ready language, perhaps? But it did. And I still, honestly, Haskell is still my favorite language, and I also like to Rust, by the way. But I would much rather be writing Haskell. And um, I guess at least from the out from kind of the midway point where I've got one foot out and one foot in the Haskell community, I see it going back to being a vehicle for research papers. There is still production use, um, but it's like there used to be. If you look at kind of the rate of new libraries being released on like Hackage over time, that's kind of slowed down. And I do wonder whether maybe it is maybe it's just an economy slowing down. Like when there was more money to kind of start all these new companies or everything, you could pick a novel technology and sometimes it really made a difference. I think often, but um, yes, the community's always changing. But I mean, also community, like people are always vanishing from the community. They have kids, or they get married, or they move, or something happens to them, right? And so like you always, if you have a welcoming like pipeline to get new people in, and they are enjoying the community and they continue to participate, you will have a new community. And that's why for me it was like bring in new people. That was always the first step, and then after that, teach them Haskell. Like bring them into a welcoming, supportive community. Um, I guess I don't know if it's still happening, but I also haven't been inducting people for a long time. So I hope that answered all of the piece of your question. I may have missed some.
So I want to ask a question. I'm not even. It's not well formed. Um, so when I sort of got into functional programming, like Haskell was always sort of held up as the exemplar, right? Because it's pure and side effects and all of that. Um, and there was also sort of that like sort of, I don't know, intimidation, and people are always like, well, I don't know, like Haskell's, too complicated and that kind of thing. And I feel like this idea of Haskell being the exemplar has sort of gone away. Um, but I'm not sure. I, that seems to sort of match when you were talking about sort of like it got really popular and then it seems to be sort of in decline in some way or stagnation in some way at this point. Um, and I'm just sort of curious if you have a perspective on that. I guess what I'd say is, a few years ago, I felt like I just heard a lot about Haskell, Haskell, Haskell. And if you're doing functional programming, but you're not doing Haskell, you're not really a functional programmer. And today I don't seem to hear that so much.
I think part of that is a lot of the features actually got slurped up into the languages. Like I would say that Rust's type system is what 75% of Haskell type system. There's still a lot of stuff you can't do, but it gives you a lot of the advantages, and things like algebraic data types that actually became a thing that people know what that means now, and that became a thing that it's perfectly normal when you see them in Rust. But for a long time, they were just unusual. I mean, look at like what's it called? What's the thing that Google uses? The protobufs. Protobufs doesn't have like full algebraic types. I forget. It only has like one half and not the other. And it's like, why? Why would you miss that? I think there's a lot of the pieces. There are still a few things that are missing. Like I haven't seen really another language that's that lazy. But also, there are a lot of languages that I consider post Haskell. Like Agda is pretty awesome. You've got dependent types there. Your types can depend on values. That's really cool. And I think there's actually now several kind of post Haskell languages where you can do a lot more. I think that a lot of the pieces were figured out and like when I was first getting into Haskell, there was things like what do we have to do with our type system? Well, you really want it to be terminating. You want your type checks to always stop at some point, because otherwise bad things are going to happen, right? And that's still sort of true in Haskell. You also want to have you don't want to have to use a total language, which something like some of the early like our type system is so awesome. You also couldn't write loops because it had to be a language that was specifically terminating as well. I think a lot of the pieces have been picked up and scattered, and while Haskell has the language and which is now Glasgow Haskell compiler, it's not just a spec anymore. It's just this one implementation. A lot of things have gotten better, but it still became more academic. But the ideas have spread. We've got so much more cool stuff now. I still like laziness. I like how it gives me like list fusion and so many other cool features that are just not found in any other place. I'm kind of looking forward to the next one. I feel like this is like the Islands of Stability, and I don't know if you're familiar with anyway, whatever. I think that hopefully we'll have another sweet spot. I think Haskell was an absolutely amazing sweet spot, especially for being from 1990, right? It's a very old language, and I'm hoping like Rust. I think is a good take, like a kind of a new design, a very different approach, and it's certainly popular. They were like, hey, we'll use curly braces instead of white space, and et cetera, et cetera. I guess I feel like one of the early problems with teaching Haskell was that like the syntax was unfamiliar, the semantics were unfamiliar, the evaluation was unfamiliar, all of these things. You're jumping in like 3 different axes. A lot of it's not unfamiliar anymore. Maybe maybe it is an exemplar of what you had 20 years ago, but now it's just not that rare or unusual.
Okay, thanks. I'll note that Florian said something very similar in the chat. So I will go ahead and stop the recording now, and then we can really talk. So all right. So thank you so much. This was great. I really appreciated it. So thank you.